Today I'm going to try to draw this big tree here in Krakow, Poland. And I was in this little park yesterday before I drew that corner with the potted plant. And I was actually getting ready to draw something over here when it started to rain. It wasn't too bad, so I figured I'd give it a few minutes. But before I knew it, it was a downpour, and everyone in the park was running for cover under trees just like this one. My wife and I found one with this huge canopy to shield us from the rain, but the dirt around us on the ground became mud and ended up splattering all over us. If you go back and watch yesterday's video, you can actually see a bunch of little dark specks on my white pants. Wrong color choice for that day, and that's the mud. Anyway, so we waited out the rain under the tree along with everyone else. But when it stopped, there was still so much water left in the foliage that it might as well have still been raining. So anywhere I would have chosen to set up to draw could have dripped on the paper. So I figured it best to save it for today. I could see this giant tree the entire time from underneath the one we were huddled under. And I knew then that this was the one I'd come back to draw. So here I am, back in the park, sans rain. Let's get into it. So as you can see, the tree itself is the obvious priority. I'm not really interested in any of the surrounding elements, and any context I might eventually include will be last minute and largely unimportant. I wanted this drawing to be something of a test, giving myself permission to focus on just this one thing. And while there are problems that we'll talk about, it was an enjoyable experience overall. I start this drawing by following the tree's silhouette, as you can see, and I do so with reasonable accuracy since there aren't many other things to consider. I'm looking up and down pretty consistently, doing what I can to follow each branch to its end. I'm conscious of intersecting branches, how and where they might overlap, and I'm trying to keep the proportions correct, at least as best I can. Before starting, as I've mentioned, I take a few minutes to loosely sketch out the scene in a pocket sketchbook that I carry around, usually in these quick, small vignettes. But more importantly, I'm taking some time to observe. I want to soak up the whole scene, the reference, as much as possible. I try to notice things I might not have had I jumped right in. I'm paying attention to which sides of, in this case, the branches are in shadow. And I want to understand ahead of time how much space the subject might take up on the paper. By the end, my tree is broader than the reference, but I think that's fine. I could have fixed this by elongating the bottom of the trunk ever so slightly, but like so many things, I wasn't really aware of this issue until the end. I ultimately spent a little less than a third of my time with this silhouette, which is a good thing because of everything I've just said, but I actually wish I could have been slightly indifferent to following each and every branch in favor of the texture and the shading, which is much more demanding and time consuming. And that brings me to something I wanted to mention today. I've been doing these little practice sessions that I've talked about either in the morning or at night, totally disconnected from these videos. I've done this for the sake of improvement, obviously. And while day one me would have thought one drawing a day would be enough, day 34 me thinks otherwise. As I exhaustively spoke about yesterday, there's practically an infinite number of things for me to learn, and putting all of that pressure on just these drawing videos, I think would be insane. I'm certainly learning along this process, this whole video making process, but by doing these small practices at home, I can better prepare myself for these drawings that you're watching. Specifically, I'd say that by giving myself as much time as possible to understand how to draw like tree bark, for instance, rather than relying on myself to grasp it along with all of the other components of the drawing as I draw them, if that makes sense. I'm in a more receptive position to these new things. Inversely, if I spent all my time trying to figure out how to get the bark right here as you're watching it, maybe I'd miss the micro lesson I could receive regarding something else. Well, two things on that. For one, you'll see that I did no such studying of bark. It really was just an example. So, don't expect any realistic textures today. But two, and the real reason I bring up all of this extracurricular practice, I've noticed a strange lack of, I guess, what I'll call transferability from drawing at home to in the field. At home, my lines are smoother, the details crisper, and in general, the drawings look more realistic. I've been considering this for about a week now, and while it could be a million different things, I think I've landed on two. First, and I'd say maybe most pertinently, my drawings at home are smaller. I draw a variety of things all over one page, and I don't really move on until it's full. I've not put much stock into this until now. I just thought of it as a more economical way to, you know, essentially waste paper. But, and maybe you know this already, everything is different in a smaller drawing. For example, there doesn't need to be as many lines. Take this tree. If I were to draw it at half the size that you see here, the shading would be achievable with significantly fewer lines. And because they're so small, they also look cleaner. Here, my shading becomes kind of a squiggly mess because any preparation for a reference like this kind of goes out the window. In fact, I drew a tree this morning. It was this, kind of eerie, leafless tree, I guess a dead tree, with a bunch of branches going every which way. And to shade it, I used these short, precise lines, and I think it looked great. So I had that experience in mind when drawing this one, and the two are unfortunately so different in practice that they seem untransferable. I could solve for this by doing bigger drawings, and I think that's what I am going to do. I still want to be able to experiment rapidly, but maybe I'll test out some bigger sketches by choosing a slice of a reference rather than attempting the full thing. We'll see. And then second, and really not any less significantly, is the drawing setup. At our apartment right now, I have a chair and a desk at which I can draw. That means a sturdy surface, a comfortable seating position, a close proximity to the paper, like a short distance from my eyes to the paper, and a place to rest my arm and my elbow. This, I think, makes a massive difference, and it's unfortunately something I can't replicate in the field when doing these videos. I'm already carrying around a bag full of artsy goodies, including, but not limited to, my tripod and famous camp chair. So there's no room for something like an easel or, God forbid, a small table. That's where I would draw the line, pun intended. The only ways I can think to solve this would be to either practice at home as though I'm outside, meaning forego the table altogether, or hope that I get better at and more comfortable with doing these drawings in the field. The second option is honestly more appealing to me. The idea of being able to draw anywhere is one of the core tenets of this channel, and I don't like the first option anyway because, like I was saying earlier, I like the idea of giving myself the best shot of comprehending and attaining a skill at home, even if I can't perfectly replicate it outside. I'd hate to inhibit that just for the sake of evenness. So, where was I going with that? Right. The practice and these videos feel like two wholly different things. It's not ideal, but like everything on this channel, from the drawings to the voiceovers, progress, however slow it might come, is the name of the game. So while I wish my outside drawings could better resemble my at-home drawings, there are reasons why they're different, and, I'm beginning to accept them. And to be honest, talking through stuff like that helps me quite a bit. By doing these voiceovers, I'm able to kind of think out loud for, at least for me, an uncommon amount of time. I get to treat this medium like a workshop, honing ideas, talking through problems, and that's something I never would have expected before starting all of this. Just the fact that I'm talking this much and sharing it publicly, no less, still is incredibly bizarre to me when I think about it. But while I'm doing it, it's like the most natural thing in the world. And I think that says something. I guess I'm just thankful I did this, or I never would have known. Yeah, so thank you for listening. Well, as you can see, I'm deep into the shading, and that's where I'll spend the majority of the remaining time. I do attend to the surrounding foliage for a moment, but most of this has been trying to make this thing look as real as possible. You can see a clear difference between my initial marks and the later ones. At first, I think you can tell that I have that at-home practice in mind. Everything is on a much smaller scale, and I ended up bouncing around because I didn't know how best to get everything down. As I would shade, I would feel overwhelmed by how much space I had left to fill. So I went from the unfinished edges of the trunk to the unfinished smaller branches to the, trying to get some of the bark texture in. And I keep cycling through these until I reach this sort of messy, broad, as I said, squiggly mess. The shading and texture here is such a clear example of the difference between this and my at-home practice. For example, just the bottom right portion of the trunk up to that first branch could very well be the size of an entire tree that I might draw for practice. So when I get to this one, it's like I'm drawing 5 or 6 trees in one. As for that foliage, I'm glad I included it because I think it does do a lot for the scene, but it lacks detail, and even worse, it lacks the suggestion of detail. Had I been a bit more careful and patient, I could have implied the foreground texture a bit better. Well, actually, maybe. Who knows? I could have made it worse, but because I was a little anxious about finishing it up, I was all over the place, and as usual, I think it really shows. You can see on the drawing side of frame, the right side of the video, that I'm in the middle of all this greenery. It's like I'm in this big forest, and it would have been nice for me to get some of these shapes in, these individual leaf shapes. You can see them so clearly in the video, and I could see them so clearly sitting there, that I really wish I could have, again, just implied that mass of foliage underneath. At least at the bottom of the drawing. But what are you going to do? It's fine either way. Like I said at the start, my priority here was the tree. So that's absolutely what got the most attention. Also, right now, I hope you're enjoying that spotlight, that sunlight directly on the page. I will say, luckily, over the past few videos, I think the brightness of the page, that whole problem I had in the beginning, has been practically solved. And honestly, I don't know how. I will say my wife helps me a lot with setting these shots up. So I know that she's, locking the focus and the white balance and the exposure on the phone. But I feel like she did that before. So I really, I don't exactly know what's going on here, but I'm really glad that you can actually see a lot more of what I'm drawing. Right. So here's our tree. I don't like it at all. I hate it, actually. For some absurd reason, I feel like I can do a lot better. But I have to remind myself that just a few weeks ago, my trees looked significantly worse. So at the end of the day, comparatively, this just means improvement. So how did you like this one? What did you think of the tree? If you have any constructive criticism for me, feel free to let me know in the comments. You could also just say that you could have done better, and that'll suffice. Also, go ahead and like this video if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. I appreciate you for taking the time to watch this one, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.